Hello all, Old Geek again, and here's part 3 of my series on placing the MERP supplements on the main Middle-earth map. I did the Northwest, Eriador, Angmar and the Troll Shores in the first video. Then in the second video I looked at the area east of the Misty Mountains, mainly Mirkwood. This video will feature Gondor, Rohan and Mordor. Here's the map, and yes, the eastern portion of Mordor is missing. And that's because all the MERP books focused on the northwest. This was a very well supported region by MERP products though, and I would expect this map to get more than a little congested. So, first to go on the map are the campaign setting books. Detailed supplements with a lot of background material regarding the geography, history and demographics of the regions, along with key individuals and features that a GM can use to create their own adventures. Starting in the north with Eisenguard and Northern Gondor. This was originally published quite early in 1983, but was reprinted in 1987 with improved maps. I would not suggest this book for a beginner. No matter how tempted you might be to get information on Orthanc and Helm's Deep, as it is quite heavy going. But if you are looking to pick it up, get the later release if you can for that extra map. A little to the east we have Riders of Rohan. Much more user-friendly than the Isengard book, this is an excellent setting guide. Though bear in mind most of the information pertains to the time before the people became known as Rohirrim. They are the Earthframe at this point in the world's history. This is another product with two versions, the first being published in 1985 and the second in 1987. Look for the later one if you can, but again I would not pick this up as a first MERP setting guide. I'll explain why later. Next up, a second edition product, or rather two linked products, published late in the game's lifespan and thus somewhat difficult to get hold of and very collectible. Southern Gondor the land and Southern Gondor the people. Rather than publish one big Southern Gondor book, as Ice did with Arnor, they put this out as two separate books from the get-go, both with over 200 pages. They are lavish, they are beautiful, they are packed with detail, but sadly they have a price tag to match. There are two smaller, more affordable earlier books detailing Southern Gondor though, both published in 1987. These are Havens of Gondor, Land of Belfalas, and Sea Lords of Gondor, Pelagia and Lebanon. If you want a game set in this region, then these are fine, especially if you want to go out on the high seas. I'm going to include the Mighty Gorgoroth book in this section. Published in 1990 and detailing the northwestern plateau of Mordor, this is not for the beginner or for the faint-hearted. It weighs in at 144 pages and is stuffed full with all manner of nasties. It's one of MERP's best supplements, but it can't be recommended to any who are new to the game. The same can be said, sort of, for the next two books, Minas Tirith and Minas Ithil. Both are outstanding guides to those famous cities, but both are almost certainly too much for most newcomers. A pleasant surprise though is due to the fact that it's fairly easy to find, Minas Tirith does not seem to command the silly prices of some of the others, especially those similar sized second edition books. I've seen it selling for less than £30 very recently, and it's a big beefy book. And that's about half the amount that most of them are going for, and a lot less than some of the gougers are asking for them. Some books are going for more than 5 times that figure, and some gougers are asking for more than 10 times that figure for some supplements. But Minas Tirith is worth looking at because of its price. If you don't mind being brave and diving straight into a book with this level of detail. Especially if the adventure books of this region take your fancy, Minas Tirith might well be worth the investment. Before I get into the adventures, here are two of the Fortress books. As with the other books from the Fortress series on the first two maps I covered, these are somewhat superfluous to the vast majority of games, and they are Calenhad, Beacon of Gondor, and Teeth of Mordor. Ignore them both, at least initially. They add a lot of detail, but they're not needed if you're just starting out. Okay, on to the adventure books. And first off, the ones that combined setting material with relatively thorough scenarios, usually 3 per book, but it did depend on whether they were simply short plot seeds or full adventures as to how thorough they are. These tend to be the slightly earlier ones with a little bit more of a leaning towards the setting than the adventures. Daggerlad and the Dead Marshes goes onto the map next. And though I like this one's contents, I feel that it's more geared towards experienced groups, as who else would be attempting to cross the fetid land in front of the gates of Mordor? Start off a bit closer to civilization. That makes sense. It's also quite an early book, being back in 1984, so it does lean heavily on the setting info, and its scenario section is pretty light on content. Another one I don't recommend starting with is 1988's Mouths of the Entwash. There's a lot more meat on the scenarios in this one, but in my opinion, especially when selecting a starting area for a campaign, a supplement lives or dies by its first scenario, the one for the lowest level PCs, the introduction. And the lowest level scenario in this book is a convoluted mess. So much so that I didn't even bother skim reading the other two, so I might be doing the other two a disservice, but that first scenario just put me off. Of a little more interest might be the Tower of Cirith Ungol and Shelob's Lair, mainly due to its close proximity to civilized lands and possible home bases. As you might imagine though, don't expect this supplement to give the players an easy ride. I have to lean towards not really recommending it for anyone new to MERP, but it's certainly an interesting location, and it is a book that is worth acquiring in time. Right, time to be a bit more positive and give a solid recommendation. So what about Eric and the Paths of the Dead? Even though this might not be a location that immediately screams out good place to start, as it is a bit off the beaten track, there is a good reason why I recommend this supplement, coming up very shortly in the video. Plus, it's a cohesive little setting guide, nicely self-contained, with a small and very manageable town in the form of Sant Eric. There's not much lore to digest, so it is nice and simple for someone cutting their teeth. So, why do I recommend it? Well, on to the ready-to-run adventures. The ones that are light on setting material, but much more complete in terms of the scenarios. And let's start with this module. Haunted Ruins of the Dunlendings. Probably my favourite of all of the ready-to-run adventure series. It's quite common on eBay, its price is very reasonable, and it meshes really nicely with the material in Eric and the Paths of the Dead. Thus, in theory, those two products could be all you need to run a decent little campaign. And Eric is a little more expensive than Haunted Ruins of the Dunlendings, but neither of them are supplements that will break the bank. If you prefer something a little further south, there is Assassins of Dol Amroth. But I haven't read this one yet, so I can't tell you anything about it apart from where it's set. and the fact that I can guess it might be about assassins and set in Dol Amroth, perhaps. Maybe. If your players insist on being brave, there's Gates of Mordor. It's probably not as vicious as its title suggests, and it would work well for a group using either Minas Tirith or Minas Ithil as a base, so that is one worth considering. And the same is true for this one, Ghosts of the Southern Anduin, which contains 4 scenarios instead of the usual 3, and they are naturally linked together. It's a solid product, though it isn't one that I've seen pop up on eBay very often, unfortunately. The last one for this video is Pirates of Pelagia. Its name tells you all you need to know. Arrgh. Reviews of this one have been a little mixed, mainly because it looks to be a bit fiddly to run. I've not read it though, so I can't confirm either way. Recommendations then for this map. I think it is a toss-up between Eric and the Paths of the Dead along with Haunted Ruins of the Dunlendings, or maybe Minas Tirith combined with Ghosts of the Southern Anduin. Both combinations contain some of the more affordable supplements for MERP, but availability can be a little bit of an issue of some of those. Minas Ithil and Gates of Mordor would also be a more than acceptable starting point. Again, that's not one that will break the bank. I'd love to be able to recommend the 2 2nd edition Southern Gondor books, but good luck finding them. And finding them is one thing, finding them for a remotely sensible price is another. Oh, before I finish, I did say at the start of the video that I didn't really recommend getting Riders of Rohan to start with. If you now look at this finished map, they didn't publish any adventure scenarios for the area, and that is a real shame. I love to play those ready-to-run adventures set in Rohan, but they, for some reason, they didn't publish any. Why? Stupid! Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video and found it informative. I've been the Old Geek. See ya!